Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Motorsport Experience Podcast. This is podcast for enthusiasts by enthusiasts, where I'm trying to bring stories of racers or riders to showcase what it is that we're dealing with and to inspire others to look further into the sport and reconnect if you have been disconnected. And on this episode, I am here with Gianmarco, and he is the race car driver, and I know him since 2008. We met a while ago when he was still testing for Formula BMW a while back, and I'll let him introduce himself. But he has had quite a lot of stories from racing and quite a lot of experience. So hopefully we'll get into that in this episode. So Gianmarco, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, Pauline. Thanks for having me. So my name is Gianmarco Raimondo. I've been racing since I was 9 years old, but I'm a racing driver and driving instructor. Like I said, in karting, I started in karting and then moved into junior Formula cars where I met you. And so I raced Formula BMW for 2 years, then raced Formula 3 for three. I almost won the championship my last year and was the first Canadian to race GP2. So it's now Formula 2. I did 4 races in GP2 and then did a lot of different testing, open wheel testing, car development, simulator development, GT testing and racing as well with Maserati, with Porsche GT3 Cup in Canada. That was actually the last car I raced, and I got back into go-karting and started coaching and instructing and did some racing as well in karting. So been really in and around the sport in every sense.
Yeah, it's quite an experience, and myself also kind of got involved with racing through karting. I discovered karting, and then I discovered motorsports, and then I discovered motorsport and all the racing, and it all went from there. So it's
Yeah.
always exciting to go back to the roots of where it has started, and small beginnings usually lead to something much bigger and much greater. So my perception of motorsports is that in Canada it's rather small. How do you see the sport as we have it here?
Like you said, it's small. Canada, it's a big country, but it's a small population. So, when the numbers are small, it's hard for a sport like racing and motorsport, a sport that's so expensive, to really thrive, especially when you can't do it all year round. Um, the thing with racing is you need heat, you need surface, asphalt, you need cars, you need expensive cars as well when you get into the higher end form of it. So Canada can't offer that as a location. So automatically we're disadvantaged in the sport just because we can't do it 12 months out of the year.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. We we are a little bit disadvantaged in that regard, but it's still not stopping people from racing. And we have a community that kind of knows each other very well, I think. And
Yeah.
that is kind of another reason to do this podcast, is to kind of support the community in the months of winter when there's nothing to do except snowmobiling around here. At
Yeah.
least the stories can carry forth the spirit, because everybody keeps trying to get back into the sport in the spring to whatever extent that we can. And it's always passion that I don't think it goes away. Once you discover it, you can't quite leave it.
Yeah. It's like you said, everyone kind of hibernates and then they go racing again. But yeah, it's because we're such a small community. It's a very small world, racing in general, and then racing in Canada is incredibly small. So you get really passionate enthusiasts and people who've been doing it a long time. You pretty much know everybody in the sport in the country, so it's pretty intimate. It's nice. It's difficult to have really competitive series, really elite series. We get Formula One in Montreal once a year, but it's on a track that isn't used as a racetrack. So it's tough, but it has its pros and cons.
Yeah. And all of that considering, of all the races that you have done, what is your most memorable experience, most memorable race?
There's a couple, but I don't have one. I have two. So one of them was when I was racing Formula 3. It was my last year of Formula 3. I was doing a European series, and I was winning the championship at the time, and it was very tough. There was about three drivers, me including myself, who we were very close in the championship. So whoever won the next race would kind of get a lead on the championship. So we were racing at Spa, and it was my first time at Spa, and they're actually racing this weekend in Formula One, coincidentally. And I just lost a good friend of mine actually a couple of days before my race weekend, and it it was really a big shock, and so I dedicated whatever race I was going to do to him, that next race to him. And I managed to win that race in the last lap battle, a very dramatic kind of fashion. And it was definitely one of my best feelings, just to, first of all, to win at Spa in Formula 3 and to do it in such a way where I could actually dedicate that performance to someone who was quite close to me that passed recently. So it was very special race. And then so that was one race, and then the second race that really stands out for me was my last race weekend in a car, which was a Porsche GT3 Cup race in Toronto at the Toronto Indy. And it was a very different kind of race because it was a one-off race. So Samantha and myself and my manager at the time, we festered up a party, and we did a fundraiser, and we generated just enough funds to do the race. And that in itself is incredibly difficult because it has nothing to do with driving on the track. And so as a driver, especially from my upbringing, I did karting and then I did formula cars. So it was just very regimented, very scheduled, very intense racing and just focusing on racing, on the athletic part of it. And then going to the complete backside of it where I had to find the sponsorship, we had to do the fundraising and build a team in order to do that, and then race at the same time. And so that race, I just jumped in and I won that race against another driver that was very that won every single race until that point. So it was a really difficult race, really challenging. I've never been in the car before. I've never been on the track before. I didn't know the tires. I didn't know how the brakes faded, how the tires faded, just so many different variables I didn't know because I've never driven the car. But there's a lot of emotions. I think that was the very first time I actually got emotional after a race because there was so much more that went on behind the scenes that I wasn't accustomed to, that it all kind of came together. And then the fact that we won at the same time was like the cherry on top. It was a really special feeling.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if in the first case, the race at Spa, do you think the purpose, the goal of dedicating that race to something bigger than yourself, the friend who passed on,
Mm-hmm.
do you think it had some kind of relevance and effect on how you were focusing or how you were racing or how the events proceeded?
Yes and no. I was at the time, I was incredibly focused. My mindset was just focused on winning all the time, and more of like an elite Olympic kind of mindset where you have to perform every time, no matter what the pressure was. But I am a spiritual person, and I did feel for sure his presence when I was, on that final lap. And for sure, it was the best lap of my life. And I think I just felt a lot more peace, I think, during that lap. It was very stress-free. and quite enjoyable actually. So perhaps there's some influence there for sure. Whether I know what it is or not, I'm not sure.
Yeah, of course, it's always hard to say, but in my experience, when we do something for more than just our egos, for more than just the end goal, things seem to come together a lot easier for us because we're not doing it just for ourselves. It's almost like universe helps you out when there's a bigger things at hand. And
Yeah.
the same with the second race when you were fundraising, there was a team involved. Maybe the collaboration had some effect in enhancing the experience.
Yeah, now that you mention it, maybe, I was extra focused to not let the team down and to really um, finish it off on a high. But at the same time, the only thought in my mind was to win as well. So I hear what you're saying with the good karma and the universe helping you out. So I think, yeah, for sure, there's two sides that play that role.
Yeah, I just think that there is a lot more than meets the eye in sport. And I try to emphasize
Yeah.
it every time that we're not just talking about cars and engines and that's all it is. There's a human component. And what I see is that when the man and the machine merge together, there's a whole new thing that emerges that some people just can't perceive that because they're not understanding. And that's what I try to translate, that there's so much more depth involved in the sport on
Yes.
many levels. And I try to tease it out and figure out, well, how exactly can we explain something unexplainable? I don't want to bring up Ayrton Senna and his amazing experiences and what he talked about with racing, but
Hmm.
just every story brings up understand what it is that we're doing exactly, because from the outside it seems that we're going around in circles, which is not quite that.
No, there's for sure something happens when you're on track. It's more of like a fight or flight kind of emotion where you have a heightened perception of things and you um, are more hyper focused. And I think last time we spoke was about the mental aspect of it. And for sure, it is not like other sports. I haven't played other sports to an elite level, but I've played many sports, and you still need to sync with what's going on with your teammates and with your environment. But to sync with your vehicle constantly, there's no breaks, there's no pauses ever. So it's much more of a subconscious connection that you have, and that is what's addicting to the sport as well. Even it doesn't matter what you drive. You could drive the slowest car ever, but it's still so much fun and so exhilarating. Despite how fast you're going, it's addicting.
Yeah, it's like that quote from the Maverick and Top Gun. He says, if you think consciously, then you're gonna be dead. You have to be
Yeah.
unconscious in order to perform that. And the same is what I see in motorsports as well. You have to move from learning how to drive and then move it to the subconscious level so that you're operating on that level that does not require thinking.
It's almost like swimming in in an ocean, and you have to go from A to B, and if you stop, you kind of will drown. You have no choice kind of mentality. You have to do it. So your brain is hyper focused, and I think that's kind of what's happening.
Yeah, and I'm curious to know if you've noticed differences in the focus between the different laps. The first lap is obviously the most intense. The rolling grid is the
Hmm.
highest of the race that we all go to see. It's so
Hmm.
amazing. But
Yeah.
how does it go between in the pits, preparing for the first lap, getting through
Hmm.
that rolling grid, and then going through the middle of the race and then seeing the last flag? What is it like in perception for you?
It definitely changes on the race, but for sure the beginning of the race, it's easy to be focused because it's the start. You're fresh. There's a lot going on. You have to kind of react to what's going on. But then after everyone spreads out and say, even if you're leading and you've been leading for a half hour, say it's a 45-minute race, in the last half hour of the race you're by yourself, it's very difficult to stay the fastest or fast enough to lead, um, without a reference in front of you, without stimulus in front of you. And I've had some races where it's just you're right in your zone and you're doing everything perfectly, but to continue doing it, I sometimes I've just been on the radio just to kind of force my brain to keep working, because you can kind of um, doze off. It's like if you're driving on the highway, it's the same level as that. Like us doing a race is kind of like a normal person driving on the highway. The same kind of focus by yourself. If you're driving for so long, there's some times where it's like, oh wait, I'm still driving. You kind of bring yourself back. If that happens when you're racing, you're going to make a mistake for sure. So there's definitely that. That's probably the hardest aspect of racing and leading, is to keep that same intensity when there isn't the same environment around you.
Yeah, it's fascinating to know that we are such an adaptable creatures that
Mm-hmm.
we can adapt even to the highest speed in a race car and get zoned out or complacent for a second, just
Yes.
like we can in a highway. It's amazing the fact that we can get to that level of comfort.
Yeah, for sure. Wow, it's just
And
decades of experience.
absolutely. And so, what do you do to keep yourself fresh? Talk on the radio, or is there markers that you look out for?
Yeah, so for me personally, I grew up learning how to use reference points, and that's a way I teach my young drivers how to drive, because it's very simple to connect the dots. This is where you brake, this is where you turn, this is where you accelerate. That's very simplified, but to that extent. But then when you're driving elite formula cars, you have breathing points, when you're supposed to be breathing, when you're shifting. If you're shifting gears sooner coming out of the corner, then you're going faster out of the corner. So it's a reference of how well you took the corner. And so I have as many reference points as I can process to keep my brain active, to keep consistent. And then you kind of modify those points as your tires degrade. You can't brake as late. And it's some other technical things as well. But for sure, reference point is, in my opinion, the only way to stay 100% throughout the span of a race.
Yeah. And so if you have experience being in a lead and having difficulty staying focused in the lead,
Mm-hmm.
is it easier if you're in the middle of the pack or at the back of the pack to focus for the duration of the race?
Um, if you're attacking or defending, right? So if you're defending, it's harder because you have to look in your mirrors. You have to look in the opposite direction of where you're moving. So it's actually very hard to defend for an entire race as opposed to attacking an entire race. So there's those two perceptions as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because when you're looking backwards, you're not looking forwards anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and
And you
you
have a
they
mirror
you,
maybe like this big.
exactly, and they always say, "Look where you want to go." So
Yeah,
that brings another level of difficulty, looking
yeah.
both ways.
Definitely have to disconnect your subconscious habit to kind of turn where you're looking.
Yeah. And then is there an element of intuition that plays a role as to, for example, when to switch the tires, if the switch from dries to rains or things like that?
Um, that's more strategic. You kind of go through that before the race when you're doing pit stops, especially. When you're going to be changing tires more so. If the leading car has a different strategy, then you do this. If they pit early, then you pit later. Like you go through all of that so you don't have to just do it on the fly. But yeah, if it's raining, that is complete driver feel. The engineers can only guess when you should change, but they know based on the lap times, based on what is actually happening. So if they see people slowing down, then obviously, if it's raining, the slick tires are becoming slower. So you might want to start transitioning to wets, but then it's what lap exactly do you do that? If you do it too soon, then you can overheat your reins. If you do it too late, then you're going too slow to get back in the pits, you lose position. So there's definitely, it's that's an interview in itself.
Yeah,
to
no, absolutely. It's
Yeah, there's a
true.
lot
There's so
lot that
much
goes
involved.
on. It's not just the driver. There's definitely engineers, and your team plays a big role in that as well.
Yeah. So what it sounds like is that racing is a team experience, even though we only see the driver on the track
Yeah.
accomplishing things. I think that we always forget about how many people it takes to actually get one driver out onto the track. The
Hmm.
engineers, the pit crew, the manager, everyone.
Well, as a mechanic, I'm sure you know firsthand exactly how hard you have to work, even if the car is fine. You have to strip it down, inspect it, put it back together, do setup, whatever. Like you're constantly working. It's not like, okay, the car's fine, I'm not going to touch it. It's like after every session, you guys are working. So um, the mechanics get the least amount of credit, in my opinion, because they work just as hard as the driver, in my opinion. But it's just when the car is not on the track.
Exactly. And for listeners who don't know, I was in a Bridgestone racing mechanics training program back in 2007. So I was working on those race cars that corporate clients would come and race. So
Yeah.
after every session, before every session, there was tons of work to do, replacing parts constantly. And then I worked with other series supporting as well. And absolutely, you're right. Mechanics do need a lot more credit because they are the ones who make the cars go. And if you look at the Formula One documentary and what kind of pressures are on mechanics there, it's
Hmm.
incredible.
Yeah, even the pit stops and just overall maintenance, right? The car is not going to finish if something's wrong with it. So it doesn't matter how good the driver is.
Yeah, and every time I look at racing, so there is a term called flow state or being in the zone, and it's easy to see how the driver would be in the zone because
Hmm.
driver is driving, he's in the car or she's in the car. But there's also secondary flow state happening, which is the group flow, the flow between all the people involved, all the communication on the radio, everything that's happening in the pit lane and pit stops. All of that is because people are on the same wavelength. And one of the things I've noticed for a while at the racetrack is that when you get there, everything kind of merges together and you become on the same page with everybody without need for explanation. Everybody knows exactly what to do, what their role is, which makes the process a lot smoother. I think has that been your experience as well?
Absolutely. Every team I've raced with, I've chosen because of the synergy. And, like I raced a lot in Italy, and as Italian team owners and teams in general, they treat everybody like a big family. And I'm sure it's like this in other countries as well. But from my experience, it's been just, if it's not, and I have been on teams where there isn't that feeling, and it definitely is not as good, for sure. But you have to be on the same page because you're all part of the same team. So if you don't treat each other with respect and with any kind of understanding, and to debate more in a constructive way rather than I'm right, you're wrong way, it just makes it a lot more difficult when it's not together.
Yeah, and that also makes me think when I watch the F1 documentary, all I see is bickering and drama. And I hope that is
Yeah,
emphasized for TV to make it more
absolutely.
interesting because I hope there is more synergy happening there. It needs to be.
Formula One teams will never publicize exactly what they're doing, how they work. Like even if you hear drivers give interviews, they'll say, "Oh, we'll see, who knows," when they know exactly what's happening, but it's just they can't say certain things for disclosure reasons. But the
Absolutely.
amount of money Formula One teams spend in developing just stupid parts to gain time and efficiency, it's absurd. So the last thing they're going to do is start showing people what they're doing, how they're doing it, who's where, and so they highlight more of the dramatic side of it, which is great because they don't show that side on TV. They just show kind of the cars and the teams working, but you don't see how pissed off the team managers get, and how human people are. Everyone's a robot on TV, and you're trained to be that way because you have sponsorship dollars, and you want to look as professional as possible. But when you go inside the trailer and the trailer door closes, people become people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I'm trying to emphasize as well. There's a lot of things that we get the glimpses of here and there on TV, from podcasts or whatever. But the essence of motorsport is that it's a collaboration. And that's the reason. It's even bigger than the reason to race, like collaboration in itself, being on the same level, syncing up so easily is kind of the reason why people do it, I believe. Of course, it's fun to race the car. It has its own aspects of enjoyment, but
Mm-hmm.
I think and being part of that, I think, is the biggest draw for everyone involved.
Yeah, it's interesting because as a driver, you don't see it as much that way. You just see it as you're more of a fighter, a gladiator, and you need to be the best, and you need to win, and you need to train, you need to be strong, you need to be focused, you need to be mentally prepared. And but when you actually put it that way, it's a much deeper meaning. And now, I probably haven't even thought about it until you said it right now, and it does make sense that that synergy is really, you see it a lot in karting when there's not a ton of money in respect to the sport being spent. And when people are, budget racing, but they're still racing, they're still competitive. It's a great time. People make friends. I still have friends to this day that I've met karting, and everyone, in the end, even if you're competitors, you still kind of, if you're camping at the track, you still kind of hang out together and joke around, and you're all in the same boat, whether you're competing against each other or not. So everyone is really it's more of a family community. It doesn't matter really what level you're racing at. Everyone knows each other. Everyone um, is competing against each other, so it may as well be friends, or at least friendly for the most part. Yeah, there's some cases where people don't like other people, but I think that's in everything.
Yeah, and I like how you said that being a driver is like being a gladiator. But I think there's another element to that I perceive is that everybody else who is not a driver is there to see those gladiators on track performing at their best. We
Mm-hmm.
always needed heroes. The society always needed someone to be the hero, someone to be the gladiator in a spotlight, because it inspires everybody else. And we have this mirror neurons that allow us to experience what the other person experiences. So it looks like this there is a reason for the drivers to be driving, to inspire others to do the
Mm-hmm.
best in what they are doing.
Yeah, drive like it's interesting. We've been taught by BMW how to actually react and be perceived when we're racing, because you never know who's really looking at and you never know who's being inspired by you, who you're influencing. And that's why everyone's very professional on TV, but at the same time, you need to always be humble and friendly to people, despite what's happening in your personal life, despite whatever, because someone, you have no idea who might be looking up to you. And it's really a great feeling as a driver to know that, because you're just racing, you're doing what you love, you're doing what you know, but the fact that you can actually inspire somebody to do that as well, and steer them into that direction is pretty powerful.
Yeah. And my next question would be around creativity. And I'm curious to know, how do you perceive creativity in your everyday life? And is there an element of creativity when you're racing?
So there absolutely is an element of creativity when you're racing. This is what separates good racers against bad racers or okay racers. So there's drivers and there's racing drivers. So people who know how to race, and especially racing in the rain, you need a sense of imagination and creativity to sometimes go think outside the box and to imagine passing where maybe a traditional pass isn't to be done, or to really assess a situation right then and there that you can't anticipate. Every passing situation is always a little bit different, so you always have to use some kind of intellect and ingenuity to kind of get your car around the other car without crashing. So for sure you need a sense of creativity, and that's something that can't be taught either. This is the aspect that drivers either have or they don't, and it's what allows them to race better than others, where they can just see things naturally and perform and take action upon them and be successful because of that. So Senna had that, and all of these great drivers and many drivers that kind of just started racing have it. Like for me, I learned how to race before I learned how to drive properly. So that, because in a race, the end result is where you finish. So it doesn't necessarily matter how well you drive, it's how many positions you make up in a race and can keep them. So for sure, there's a creativity. And to answer your first part of your question, myself personally, I like to think I'm creative, but yeah, I don't know. It's something I don't really think about or really focus on, to be quite honest. Maybe ask someone else if I'm creative or not, but I like to think I am. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting fact that you say that it can't be taught. You either have it, you don't. But do you think the person can expand more or develop themselves more of what they are creative in, or how to become more creative? If it can be taught, can it grow?
That's a tough question. I don't think so. Um, it's like teaching somebody how to feel something, teaching someone how to feel happy or how to feel sad. I don't think you can do that, and if you can, it's not in the same way, in my opinion. Anyway, so it's such an intimate feeling and perception you have, that I don't know how you could teach somebody, and if you could, and how they could actually grasp it the same way someone who naturally can do it would.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's possible that there are certain aspects that can't be taught, but because we are multidimensional human beings with a multiplicity of interests, I
Mm-hmm.
think it's possible to use certain aspects of life and bring it forth in order to accentuate whatever creativity is at hand, because I'm all about creativity. So personally, I believe that there are ways in which we can enhance our strengths to the
Mm-hmm.
point where it could take over the other areas and replace the lack of creativity, maybe with something else, maybe some
Mm-hmm.
other aspect of ourselves.
Yeah.
So
I think it takes a certain level of intellect as well to really identify what it is you're actually trying to find in terms of racecraft and creativity in that sense. And over repetition, like there's some drivers that don't have it, but they just keep driving. They do so many laps and so many laps and so much coaching. They eventually can do it, but it's not natural. So when they're in a situation where it's like something that they haven't ever been taught before, they won't think of it right away in that moment, right away, split second. they might have to think about it, and then the moment's passed.
Yeah, in your opinion, do you think creativity is related to how fast somebody is?
Um, no, no. Like, well, now that I think about it, maybe. But like absolute speed, I don't think so. It's more of applying theory to reality, but it has, I think, it has something to do with it. There's not a lot of slow drivers that can race really well.
That's true. That's true. And like it's such an abstract concept that trying
Mm-hmm.
to tease it out, we could spend hours on that alone. So it's
Yeah.
just an interesting exercise of looking at it and conceptualizing how creativity could possibly
Mm-hmm.
be connected to somebody being the winner or not.
Yeah, like I've experienced this coaching a lot of karting kids where they're so fresh, you don't know if they have it or not, and they just need to learn maybe a couple techniques, and then all of a sudden they can just drive through the field and win. But it's at the same time they're not slow doing that. But maybe
Yeah,
they just need
it's
to be taught something to kind of show them the light, you know?
true. True, absolutely. There's so many variations.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is awesome. And in kind of closing, I'd like to know what is present for you right now. What are you working on? What kind of projects are you working on? Are you racing? Are you just coaching?
Yeah, I'm trying to move out of Canada because of the initial topic we were discussing regarding how small Canada is despite its size, and the fact that I can't not just race 12 months out of the year, but I can't work 12 months out of the year. And because Canada is so small, so niche, that it doesn't really matter your skill level. People don't want to spend a ton of money in the sport as well because you can't do it to the same extent where you can do it in Europe or in the States or wherever. So, my next chapter is going to be definitely another move, but that's going to take some time still.
Well, it's awesome. And while
Mhm.
you are still in Canada, while you're still here, Canada is going to enjoy your coaching and your expertise and all
Oh,
the
thank you.
years of experience. And if people wanted to find out more about you, where can they do that?
So I have a website. It's racemondo.com, but I'm very active on social media. Instagram is my platform of choice. So my handle is at racemondo, and you can learn everything about me through those two outlets. And I have Facebook and TikTok and all of the social media platforms. So I'm quite active on it all.
Amazing, amazing. Well, thank you very much for all this inspirational, experiential knowledge that you have and shared with us. Hopefully, listeners will find a lot of value in this. So stay tuned for the next episode, and thank you very much.